On today's podcast, I am so excited. We have a lady with us who really needs no introduction if you are in and amongst the birth world. Not only is this brilliant woman a privately practicing midwife, which we love, she is also a senior lecturer at the School of Nursing and Midwifery at the Western Sydney University. So she's an incredible researcher. Her most well-known research is in VBAC, so vaginal births after caesareans, with her PhD finding on birth after caesarean being nationally and internationally recognised, leading her to become, well, a bit of a celebrity really in the VBAC world, speaking at numerous conferences and seminar settings. And recently she was the lead researcher on the largest maternity experiences survey, the Birth Experience Study, or BEST for short. Dr Hazel Keedle, welcome.
Oh, hi there. Thank you for inviting me
Yay.
to speak. Yeah, lovely to catch up with you again.
How's your introduction? Do you feel things when you hear people say all of that, like in one paragraph?
Oh, it's pretty big.
You're just so talented. It's so talented. You have to touch on everything. And that's still not everything. You know, you have like 2 decades of experience in this world, which is just insane. It's just amazing. I remember hearing you speak at, was our Ritz event in Sydney. That's where you came on the panel. And I remember sitting beside you, not knowing much about your research, and honestly, my jaw was just open. Just the amount of knowledge that you hold in your brain and the difference that you've really made in the VBAC world. It just hit me. I was like, right, I need to know about this lady now. So I'm hoping all our listeners will feel the same. So there was obviously a lot in that intro that I just went through that we obviously want to talk about. But I thought we could start with that amazing story of what first got you interested in VBAC research, because I've heard a little bit about it. I've read a little bit on your blog, but I'd love to hear it from you, and I think everybody would too.
Yeah, well, I was ready to have babies, and I had married an amazing man, and we had our first baby was a planned home birth, and he ended up being breech, and I ended up transferring in and having a cesarean whilst I was in labour. So I was in labour, and it wasn't awful, but it wasn't amazing, and it was a big adjustment for me. From, I remember the day before when my waters are broken and things were starting. I had this beautiful visualization of this water birth that was going to happen at home, and then to have something very different, was not a shock, as in not expectation wise. It was just not a wonderful experience, and I didn't do great psychologically after that. But then what really shook me was within a few months, I found out I was pregnant again, which I was not expecting. We thought it would be a few years. And I was fully breastfeeding this baby. So I thought that I would have breastfeeding amenorrhea and I wouldn't be getting pregnant. But my little daughter has always rushed through life, and I was pregnant only 4 months after I conceived only 4 months after my cesarean.
Wow.
Didn't find out till 6 months after, but that hit me more than anything, because I then thought, well, that only makes 13 months in between a cesarean and the next birth. There's no way I can have this vaginally, and we only wanted the 2 because I have 3 stepchildren as well. So, I just thought, that's it. I've come from this home birthing world. I'm immersed in the home birthing world. My granny was a midwife, and I can't even have a vaginal birth myself. And I spent a weekend reading all these stats about VBAC and just thinking, I can't do it. Like, how am I going to do this? The uterine rupture rate was tripling, and compared to what it was. And I walked out of my room of reading, and I went to my husband. I was just really feeling down about it. And he said, well, what's the stats then? And I said, well, there's it goes up from, less than 1% to a 2.7% chance of me having uterine rupture. And for me, when you're looking at those numbers being so small, like suddenly jumping up to 2.7 seemed huge. And he was looking at me quite quizzically. And I'll admit, he is the numbers person in our relationship. And he said, but that gives you more than 97% chance of not rupturing. Like, what are you worried about? Like, surely it's more dangerous to get in the car and drive to the hospital. You're more likely to die in a car accident than you are to have your child rupture. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I kind of like what he says. I might not 100% get it, but I'm going to go with that. And I then decided at that point, that's it, I'm having a VBAC. I don't feel like I'd learned a lot about it. I was a midwife by this point. I was just out my new grad year. But I don't feel like I'd had a lot of knowledge about it during my midwifery training, and certainly didn't get to see a lot of VBAC, maybe one or two during my training. And then I was working in a low-risk unit that didn't allow it. So I wasn't even seeing it in my workplace. So it was a real unknown for me. But fast forward those 9 months, and it was another home birth transfer, and I was still very, very determined. But that labour was like getting into a boxing ring. People were lovely, but some people weren't. And there was coercion used. There was obstetric violence used. There was all sorts of things that happened. And I just had to keep fighting and saying, no, I'm doing this. And the time that they said that I'm going to be wheeled to theatre was her time of birth. So at 4:00 on the dot, and they kept saying to me, we're going to take you at 4:00 to theatres. And I'm like, no. And so I think it made an impact, because literally her time of birth was 4:00 on the dot.
Wow.
And I pushed her out of my vagina on a birthing stool with my husband holding me down, because at one point I had a midwife either side of me trying to pick me up, because the doctor said get her on the bed.
Oh my God.
But he's a big man, so they had no hope trying to lift me as well as lift him. I just said, hold on, don't let them get me. And I roared this baby out, and then was just kind of in shock that I had done it. And then came the euphoria, and I felt amazing. And I always felt like I was a strong person, but now I felt strong again. I'd lost that. And that my body could do this. My body absolutely was capable of doing this. And I was left with two questions. One, did any other woman feel as amazing as I did? Because I was on cloud 9. All the doubts I'd had, all the poor mental health I'd had straight after the cesarean was all gone when I knew that I'd done it. But I was also left with a bit of grief in the fact that I felt so sad that I had to fight so hard. And if I had to fight so hard, and I was a midwife, if I had to fight so hard, how on earth did any other woman in Australia manage to have a VBAC? So those two questions really led me into a fortunate meeting with the amazing Professor Hannah Darling, it was at a community event, and I had shared my birth story in that community event. And then she approached me and said, you need to research this. And so even though there were 5 kids under the age of 10 at home and a newborn baby, within 2 years I'd started my research journey with a master's, research master's, into why women have women's experiences of having a VBAC at home. Because at this point I was then also doing some home birth midwifery and knowing that VBAC, a lot of women want to have a VBAC at home, and I hadn't been able to, so I wanted to explore their experiences. And then I got addicted to research, and went dive straight into a PhD, and then the rest is kind of history, really.
Well, you're so good at it, so you should have been thrown into research. I'm just wondering, were they giving you reasons why they were pushing for that cesarean, or was it just you had a previous cesarean, it's too close together, and that's it? That's what we've been, told.
Well, I had deliberately avoided antenatal care during my pregnancy, because I just felt that fight would be about this short interpregnancy interval. And they would say it was too short and therefore you have to have a cesarean. So I kind of avoided, but I was a midwife. And as we know, midwives know how to manipulate the system. So I would go to work. I had to go back to work a bit earlier than originally planned, because I had to get my nurse's award to be able to go on maternity leave a second time. So you had to go back and do set a set amount of months before you can then access it again. So I didn't use up all the maternity leave I wanted to with my first baby. So while I would go to work, I would just get my colleagues as friends to do my blood pressure and listen to the baby's heartbeat. And, I had maybe 2 scans, and that was all I wanted to have. And so whenever the obstetricians would say, "Oh, it'd be lovely, should we have a little chat about it?" And I'd be like, "No, thank you."
Fine. Don't touch me.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. And I relied on friends to support me at home, which didn't actually eventuate, but was the way that I was going. So I can't say I was planning to free birth, or I didn't have antenatal care, because I did, because I'm in the system, so I knew how to do that and get friends to do that for me. So I was certainly being monitored, but I wanted to avoid that conversation. But during labour, I can't actually tell you exactly why they were saying that. I'm sure that outside the room they were concerned about the short interpregnancy interval. That would have been their preference if I just went straight for theatres. But all sorts of reasons and excuses were given to me, from the sublime to the ridiculous. I mean, when I was having an internal vaginal examination, a midwife said to me, "You do know we had a baby die from uterine rupture recently," whilst her fingers were
Oh my
inside.
gosh.
Which I now know is obstetric violence, because not only is that the use of coercion, but that's doing it while you're having an intimate vaginal examination. And then I had a doctor that was coming in and out of the room all day. And gosh, there were so many excuses. I got told that I was too quiet at one point, so I won't be strong enough to push my baby out. I got then told I was being too loud, that I wouldn't be able to push my baby out. And then I got told at one point she came in, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, and I always remember this, sitting on the edge of the bed, and I was using gas by this point, and that's it. And my husband was reading the paper or something, and I was in a good zone, I never got that amazing support from a home birth, but I was in a good zone by myself, and I was waiting for a girlfriend to turn up to support me as well. And the doctor just kind of said to me, "Oh, I'm really concerned that you're going to be the kind of woman who sucks their baby back up rather than pushes it out."
What?
And that's kind of the look that I gave. I just kind of
so bad.
I just kept thinking, what the fuck? But
How dare
when you're on gas, right? You've got this. It's like you've got cotton wool in your mouth, and you can't actually say, And I've got all these really good comebacks in my head, and I just can't actually say them. It's like my mouth is full of cotton wool. So I'm just looking at her going, what the hell is she going on about? And then thinking, well, I'm a midwife. I don't think I've seen someone suck a baby.
So where would it go?
I'm really trying to think about it. And then she just kind of looked at the CTG and ran out the room. And my husband said, if looks could kill Hazel, you just killed that doctor. And I went, I just don't get what she's saying. And then I may have said straight afterwards, will you pass me that block of chocolate? I knew I was nil by mouth. Let's just say I managed to eat a half a block of chocolate. But, I then he went to take a bite out of it. That was almost the breaking point of our marriage. He threw me half of the block of the chocolate. And then in my mind, again, cotton wool mouth, couldn't say it. It was going back in the bag so I could finish the rest when I pushed it out of my vagina.
100%. You deserve that, Hazel.
He went to break a piece off, and I think I did that look again. And I went, no! And then he put it in the bag and didn't touch it. And then as soon as she was born, there's all those lovey-dovey feelings holding your baby. And I was like, just give me the rest of that chocolate. I need to eat the rest of that bar now.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Through that labour.
And I think I remember reading that you said that because you're a midwife and you know about the CTG, you were able to just kind of take it off, go into the shower.
I just used to press pause on it, so that then you wouldn't get the big realms of paper coming out. And I would unplug myself and go to the toilet or go in the shower, and then come back in, plug myself in, press play again. So I knew that kind of stuff, but I wasn't supported. And there was a midwife that was on duty that I really liked, because I knew that hospital and I trained there, and I asked for her to look after me, and they wouldn't give her to me. She had other people she was looking after. And that's fair enough. There's allocations that you've got to do, but I didn't really have that constant support and care. And in the end, I did get a midwife I worked with in the other hospital. She came down to be my support because I'd gone from having a whole plan to having no one other than my husband. So, and I said to him, you need to find me another woman. And so he did. He rang my workplace, and they released a beautiful midwife to come down and support me. And she went and got the birthing stool because she could see that I was squatting with every contraction and then finding it harder and harder to stand back up again. And so, yeah, she was amazing. She really did she got the verbal transition diarrhea from me when she turned up, and we sent hubby off so he could go and finally get his own chocolate. And I just like went into this whole, what if I can't do this? What if I can't push my baby out? What if I can't blah, 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 which I know obviously was transition. And she just turned around to me and said, Hazel, I think you are one of the strongest women I've ever known. And if I can do it, she goes, and I have done it, I know that you can. And in that whole, like, you know, you've got no tact when it comes to labour. You know, I just turned around and went, you're right. Like, if you can do this, I can. And I, like, afterwards, I'm like, oh, my God, that was so rude. It was exactly the right thing to say to me at the time, but not quite the right response, I don't think. But it certainly did motivate me, and straight away I started pushing after that and said, get my husband back in here.
The baby's coming. It's such an amazing introduction as well, like into a whole new like path of your life, like going from having a little baby in midwifery, and then what a cool fork in the road to have those experiences.
Well, felt like I didn't know a lot about it, and therefore not a lot of people did, and it was kind of this mysterious high risk issue that, you know, I don't think midwives really had, not every midwife had a lot of ownership in. And, you know, there was just a big lack of knowledge. And I'm a very, I love seeking knowledge. And so that's a real trait that I have, that I love to have, because I just want to find information all the time. So it did just send me on this knowledge-seeking journey, but basing it from real, you know, really strong foundation that I knew what it felt like to have, even to have that taken away just because, or the potentially taken away because of not fitting a normal criteria for VBAC, so because of the short pregnancy interval, but then also not really being supported in the, not, you know, I was a home birth midwife. I'm not anymore, but because this is more than a full-time job now. But you know, I know what good support is, and I wasn't getting that in the hospital system. And yeah, like, just how do other women do this, and do other women feel like I felt? Because I felt so amazing. So yeah, having those questions really stuck with me all the way throughout.
Is that kind of echoed in the BEST study as well, for those that haven't gone through with a fine-tooth comb with the results of the BEST study? But what do you find?
BEST was a good jump, or a good step after my PhD, because you know, the PhD was all about vaginal birth but I learned a lot in there about the use of coercion and the use of obstetric violence, birth trauma, because it all comes into VBAC very much so. Especially, you know, my PhD survey found that instead of 1/3 of women experiencing birth trauma, those that had a previous cesarean, there were 2/3 of women who experienced birth trauma. So even coming into the VBAC space is, you know, so many more women who've experienced birth trauma. So I guess I was kind of in that area and in that world because of what women were experiencing and what I was writing up, and then to put that all into a book as well to support women. So when BEST came along, well, we named it, but when the opportunity to do BEST, it was quite exciting because I'd done a national survey on women who'd had a previous cesarean. Hannah and I had worked on the birth in the time of COVID one together. So then it was like, well, this can look at all women's experiences. So I have had this natural progression. I started off with women who had a birth at home after a cesarean, and then all women's experiences of planning a VBAC, and then all women's maternity experiences. So I guess that trajectory for me is really, you know, really grounded in what is women's experiences of maternity care. And that's I'm very passionate about, because I think we need to, it's one thing to say, well, this is what our services are going to look like from a service point of view, or from a manager point of view, or from a health professional's point of view. But if we don't design it with the women in mind, or actually using their experiences, their own lived experiences, and actually designing what they want, then what is the point? And women won't come if it's not the right, or they won't get a great experience.
Yeah.
So for me, the birth experience study was an exciting opportunity to look at all women's experiences. It was literally just to find out what are women's experiences of maternity care in Australia in that previous 5 years, and then what is the prevalence of birth trauma in that cohort, and what are their experiences of birth trauma. And I think that's kind of our biggest aims of the survey. What we found is so much more, because we weren't expecting to get as many women as we did do the survey, or to write as many comments as they did. Like, women can really write, and to be able to expand it internationally, which is what we've also done.
What did you find surprising out of those results? Because did you get like 5,000 respondents?
We got 8,000.
Wow.
Yeah, just under 9,000 completed surveys. We had over 12,000 hits to the survey platform, and then just under 9,000 that had completed at least 75% or more. So that's a good amount. There were lots of things. I mean, there were things that we hadn't asked in previous surveys. So it was the first time we had asked about obstetric violence. We'd asked about birth trauma before, but this was a co-designed study with maternity consumer organisations, and one of those organisations really wanted us to ask about obstetric violence. So we thought, well, why not? This is an avenue to do this, and it's co-designed, so you're making that choice for us.
Yeah.
And those results really surprised me, so much so that the first paper we wrote, there's a bit of a caveat there because we wrote a poetry paper, but the first real findings paper that we wrote was on the findings of the obstetric violence question, and the comments and analysis of the 626 comments that were left. So that, I mean, I can't say it was surprising, but it was important.
Shocking.
Yeah, it was shocking at times, and it was important, and it was it was also, I'm forever grateful for the women that did share that story, that did answer that question and tell us their story on that, because while it had such a major impact into so much of what's happened specifically in New South Wales, but also internationally, just that one paper, and we've had 5 papers published, and we've got more under review at the moment. So that one was that's an important, and I think it's very surprising impact from what came from the survey. We could never have imagined to be where we are now at the other end of a birth trauma inquiry back then when we were putting the survey out. Other things that have surprised me, like we've had lots of little mini projects go in and analyze little sections of it. We've got a paper that I'm writing at the moment on what women's experiences of birth plans, which is really interesting stuff on there. What whether they got support or not support from healthcare providers on birth plans. I'm finding that quite interesting. We've done a paper that we're very shortly going to submit, that I've done with a medical student who's a beautiful medical student. Shout out to Lucy. And she analysed women's experience, what women said about talking to somebody after birth. So basically birth debriefing. And when we wrote that paper together, the woman's experience of birth debriefing hadn't been done before. So that's women were so good at being able to identify to us what was helpful debriefing and what was unhelpful debriefing from their experience. And that's it's just like turning the tables on so much of the research that's out there. They'll turn around and say, well, we don't have very good evidence to support why you do X, Y, and Z. And then, but it's like, but have you actually ever asked the women?
Yeah. We'll talk. We'll tell you. Just we need the right questions.
Yeah, exactly. And so then we actually hear from the women that that it is really vital, and not just when birth is traumatic, in all birth scenarios. And so to get that rich data and then to be able to put that out is really exciting. So there's a lot that's surprised me, a lot that's been really sad as well. But you know, we have used those negative experiences to really make change, and I think that's where a birth experience study at best, we've brought into our international collaboration aims, is to aim for impact. We're not just here to use people's surveys or use people's stories for our own benefit as researchers. We actually want to aim for impact. So every one of our 14, nearly 15 countries now, and there's one more recently joining us, is that at the heart of what they do is to aim for change, aim for impact. And at the core is that this survey is designed with women, for women, to listen to women.
Yeah.
And really hold on to that every single time.
Wow, so important.
Love that.
Thank you, Hazel.
Yeah. So good. I really needed somebody like you to do that, to have a real brain for research. I was thinking while you were telling that initial story about how you said, you know, the chance of uterine rupture is only 2.7%, and you know that was a big number, and your husband sort of had to turn it around. Well, that's 97, you know, more than 90% chance to have a vaginal birth. And I was just wondering, did you then go on to research for women that haven't had a previous cesarean what their uterine rupture rate is, just generally?
Well, it has been a really helpful study actually come out of Europe, which was a multi-center, multi-country study. That the cohort was 2.5 million women, and they looked from that 2.5 million women, they looked at all the uterine ruptures, and there were only 865 or something like that.
Wow.
800 and something, which made that uterine rupture rate very, very small. So easily less than 1%, and I think it's 0.2% once you look at those that have had a previous cesarean. But there were so number wise. Remember, we're looking at 2.5 million was their cohort. 800 and something. I'm thinking it's 865, but that I could be wrong. But 800 and something had a uterine rupture, and 700 and something had a previous cesarean. So there was still this very, very small group. And we know it can happen. We know it can happen through a variety of maybe different risk factors or situations. Intimate partner violence can cause it. You know, direct hitting and kicking onto the uterus can cause a uterine rupture, and more things that can cause. A car accident, you know, the direct pressure onto it. I mean, these are very, very rare and don't happen very often, that we don't really have that kind of numbers to be able to say what the rate is just for any other woman. Having many, many babies can cause it. So women that have had lots of babies could have that. But overwhelmingly, the largest risk factor is having a previous scar on the uterus. And so that could be like a major myomectomy and other surgeries that could happen as well. But having that not keyhole or through the vagina, but actually having to have a scar on the cesarean. But still, that was a 0.2% chance out of all the women that had a previous cesarean.
It's so low.
And it's so crazy thinking about, like, if you thought about the 100 women, and it's like, less than one of those women might have it normally, or it might go up to like 2.5, maybe 3 out of those 100. Is that, you know, thinking about that, does that make you go, okay, well, I should definitely have another cesarean for that very small, you know, percent increase?
I think it's look, every woman has to make that decision for themselves on what they're happy with the risk for. And I think that's a personal decision. I think it's a personal decision on every choice that you make with your body. But it's the difficulty that we have in our maternity system is we're not always that good at giving full informed or being able to get fully informed consent, because we don't give full informed information. We don't give everything.
Yeah.
And so it's then difficult to make that choice when you're being given hyperinflated or coerced information. How can you really make that decision? Which is why one of the reasons I wrote my book in the first place was so that I wasn't saying you have to have a VBAC, and I don't even use the term VBAC in the title, because it wasn't about that. It was actually just knowing the information and then making the choice to have a better birth than you had last time. And how that better birth looks is up to the woman. And some women may choose to have a repeat cesarean, but even if they don't choose that, they need to be prepared for one. And so, that's how I wrote the book. This is how you could get prepared for a VBAC. This is how you could get prepared for a repeat cesarean. You need to be, if you're planning a VBAC, you need to be prepared for the repeat cesarean as well. Not because it's like unlucky to not, it's just so that you can stay in control. And if your birth is having to go towards a repeat cesarean, that you're still the one in the driving seat. You're still the one who's making the decisions. And if you don't think about that at the time beforehand, very hard to think about it at the time. So it's really about giving that information. I've got a whole chapter in there where I look at the risks of repeat cesarean versus vaginal birth, and in labour versus out of labour cesareans as well. And there's a whole bit in there about uterine rupture where I talk about that study. It's called the INOS study. And I break it right down to what does that mean, and what does that look like. And then the other really important factor to that is, well, is having uterine rupture the full stop? Like, is that the end? Does that mean, has the nuclear explosion happened and everyone's dead? Well, no. And so I also write about that, and that's what that study was really helpful for, is that it told us what the outcomes were for the women and the babies out of that 800 odd who did have uterine rupture. And that's actually really illuminating and powerful to know that information, because it's often given uterine rupture, death. And actually it's not, they're not what the figures are really showing. Actually, in that study, 90% of the babies survived. So when women are being told, if you have uterine rupture, your baby will die, that's not true. In that study, where there was good resources, you're in the hospitals, or good transfers in, then 90% of them survived. And I think it was less than, I think out of all of the 800 and something, only 2 women died. So, when I remember in one of the quotes from my survey was, a woman was told in an appointment with her partner present, the partner was told, if your wife goes for a VBAC, you will be left with a dead wife, a dead baby, and a toddler to raise on your own.
Oh my God.
So and sad. That's when you show that. But then if you're in that room and you're that partner, the whole aim is to get that partner to use coercion. For the woman to make that decision, or the woman to feel guilted into making that decision. So as researchers, it's our job to put the research out there and actually show you how you actually translate that research, what that looks like to you. And then from that point, it's up to the woman to make that decision.
Yeah. I remember because I had a VBAC, my first was cesarean and then second at home. And that was one of the things I checked off with my midwife, that was in the back of my mind. That was one of those myths, what are my chances of uterine rupture? Am I being selfish and silly wanting to have a vaginal birth after a cesarean? And yeah, she was amazing. She put my mind at ease and said, it's almost the same, if not just a little bit more than, if you were just to have your first baby. So, if that's what's worrying you, I'm confident. You can be confident too. We can go ahead, with this home birth. And it just meant the world to me, just somebody, knowing the figures and knowing that it was just such a small risk and that she was happy to take that on as well was, it was amazing. And just for people who are listening, the book that Hazel's talking about, if I get this right, Birth After Cesarean, Your Journey to a Better Birth.
Yep, that's
is the title. Yeah, beautiful.
The other thing I just wanted to jump in with is when we also look at that, what happens after uterine rupture. Actually, in my book, there's, I'm going to say 15 stories, I hope that's right, of women who've all had VBACs. And there's at least one, probably 2, if I remember correctly, of women who'd also experienced uterine rupture. And that's something we don't have evidence on, the qualitative experiences or the women's experiences of having uterine rupture. So I'm really excited to say that I actually have a Masters of Research student who's absolutely amazing. So shout out to Ansley. And she is doing this for her Masters of Research project. So probably early next year, she will be recruiting and interviewing women who've had a previous uterine rupture and what their experience was, because again, that's just as vital in research, to understand what those experiences are and what would women do and what would their choices be and what happened next time in their pregnancy and what do they feel about it, because we just have a patriarchal viewpoint that says, well, you've had a uterine rupture, or if you've had certain things that have happened, then next time around you have to have an elective cesarean at this many weeks, and that's your only choice. But in my PhD survey, I had a handful of women who'd had previous ruptures, and they half of them, they all wanted to plan a VBAC, and half of them did. Wow. So it was, it's actually look at what's life after, and what is their experiences of having uterine rupture. And so I'm really excited by that study and to be her.
It's like the whole picture, isn't it? Like you really need to look at all of the aspects, not just the birth, because like how you feel after a VBAC, I imagine would just be completely different to how you'd feel, and so that impacts your entire life.
It does. And I did get that answer. One of the questions that I had, like, did other women feel like this, when I did my first research study into women having a VBAC at home, and I asked this great question at the end. So they may have told me about it. By this point, they've told me about their whole story. So the first cesarean and then the VBAC at home, and then I would say towards the end of the interview, so tell me how you felt after your VBAC at home. And you would just see women like have this draw up a breath, and then they would plume out like a massive big peacock would and just say, I felt amazing, or I felt so healed, I felt like Superwoman. And that became the title of one of my papers, I felt like Superwoman. And you would just see they could have talked about this trauma and the journey to get to where they did, but then suddenly they would be like, but I felt amazing afterwards, I felt so healed. And I made a little snippet of I made a sound bite of all those reactions, and I used to play it at conferences I went to, and right at the end I'd be like, after all that you've heard, blah blah blah, I just want to leave you with how women actually feel after having a VBAC at home. And I would just play that, and it would choke me up every time, and it would choke up the audience, and it was just it's why we do it, right? It's what it came down to, is that it felt really powerful. So, Eleanor, how did you feel after your VBAC at home?
Oh, yeah, it was amazing. It's just so, I think I was in shock straight away. Just like I did that. I did that because I was just so disappointed from the first one. I really felt that I could have done it. There was no reason for the cesarean. He was a surprise breech, and they kind of just freaked out. And I was just so, I really felt robbed. It was just like, what happened? Looking back at it, like somebody has just taken that experience that was going to give me this amazing feeling and empowerment, and it's just gone, nah, you don't get that. And it took a long time for me to want to have another baby after that, which is something we hear so much, which is just, that's so heartbreaking for me when women don't have another one, or they're really, nervous about it. But yeah, getting pregnant, I was really apprehensive the whole time. And so that probably added it to it as well, just thinking, I don't even know if my body can do it. Like, what if my body just cannot birth normally? Like, maybe that's why I ended up with a cesarean, all those things running through your mind. Yeah. And then when it finally happened, I think I was just in shock, just like, I was right. Like, I was right all this time. Like, I knew I could do it. Why did I let them and then that feeling like, oh, I let down my son for his birth. Like, why was I better informed? Why didn't I protect my space better? All those feelings. But the overall feeling was just like joy. Like, I took it back. I took back that experience, and I did it my way this time.
Absolutely. And it was never, in all the women that I've spoken to and the research that I've done in VBAC is never just the end either. Like, it's just the beginning. And what women have done when they've had a VBAC just astounds me. You know, they become like film producers.
That's right.
They become researchers, or they become doulas, or they become midwives. In 3 of the stories that are in my book, they are either still going through or have qualified as midwives. They went in to become a midwife because of their VBAC experience. Like, it is throwing a massive rock into a pond and seeing the ripples. And, you know, I try and get midwives excited by saying, you know what, you actually are changing the face of maternity and women's lives every single time you support a woman, because it never stops with her. Even if it's just having a talk to somebody, maybe just saying to someone, you know, you do have a choice. Like, even just being that, or being on a social media group for VBAC, and being that person that at 2 a.m. answers the person who says, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And you're like, I know you can. You've got this. I did it. You know, people don't stop just because once they've had the VBAC, they just have to go and make the world a better place. So we're making the world a better place every time we support a woman have a VBAC.
That's so true. And that was something that we tried to highlight in the film, not just with VBACs, but just, you know, birth even after trauma in general, or just like having a great birth. It's just like the people forget what happens to that woman after the birth, and then what she can do for her family, how she can mother, how she can be, you know, a partner, a wife, and then what she does then for her community. Like, it's just like, it's almost like we've forgotten that women are actually the center of the birthing experience. Like, there is a baby, and you know, that needs to be taken into consideration, and, you know, everything needs to be healthy and medically sound. But it's just like, what about that woman? Like, I think I read in one of your articles about placing women back in the center of that decision making, and I was wondering, like, you know, why has it gone so far from that, and what can we do to bring it back?
Why it's gone so far, I think, is because of the system that got built up around maternity care, and that risk paradigm of moving it from, you know, community midwifery. Like, midwives have always been around. We've been around longer than we've had hospitals. We've been around longer than we've had doctors. We've been around in the Old Testament, and in most ancient scripts, they talk about the midwife. Women have always needed to have somebody who is knowledgeable about birth with them to support them during that time. And in some communities, like our First Nations communities, that's been women's business. And every community that you go to, and lots of I've forgotten the term for them, but they've travelled around and they've checked. This is in every single community that you would have a midwife. But over the years of medicalisation, that got taken over from the world woman paradigm, which is what midwifery comes from. We know that women are generally well and they need that support, and we can provide that support and knowledge to help, to women are sick and broken. And when it got taken over through medicine, and then midwives replaced with nurses, then you're looking from an illness paradigm, because doctors and nurses, and I'm a registered nurse as well, and had 10 plus years of working just nursing before I went to midwifery. And I went through that change, so I get it, is that, you know, you're trying to fix things. You know, you're trying to alleviate pain, not say you've got this and you need this pain. It's, oh my God, you've got pain, let me give you some drugs to try and stop it. So when you look at it from a different paradigm of illness, people are sick and we need to fix them, then in birth and maternity, that just doesn't work, because women are not broken in the first place. And the more we've tried to fix them by adding pain relief in there, or, you know, they're not going into labour quick enough, so let's get labour started by these synthetic drugs. The more we try and fix them, the more we break women further. So if we just recognise they weren't broken in the first place and they wanted support and we're the right people for that, then we wouldn't have got to the situation that we're in, where women innately think that they are broken. And it doesn't help that our society does that from a very young age. And I think it's even worse now with social media, because you're never glorified for being the perfect body that you already are. You know, I think even just within the room now, if we really wanted to pick apart parts of our body that we don't like, that wouldn't be a hard conversation. We'd easily be able to do that. And it's an insecurity that we have because we're brought up like that. You're either too big, you're too small, you're too heavy-chested or too flat-chested, your bum's not big enough or it's not round enough, or you inject it to make it even rounder. Like, it just doesn't stop, does it? Your skin's either not dark enough or you want to lighten it. Like, you can never actually be allowed to be comfortable in your own skin. So then you go into having babies, and again, you're told you're broken. You're not going into labor, or your bump is too big, your bump is too small, you're not looking right for the way that you should at this point, you're not behaving correctly, your labor didn't start naturally, you can't do that, so we need to do it for you. So it just feeds into the fact that we're broken constantly. So when a woman then has a cesarean and is holding this baby, she's often not going to think they did that to me. They're going to think, my body is not able to do this. So when you then have to fight it particularly with a VBAC, and I know because I felt the same things as you, Eleanor, that you get all the way through to having a baby and you've never had it pushed out vaginally, you then think your body's broken. What if my body can't do this? And I said exactly the same things. What if my body isn't capable of doing this? Well, why wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
We're so used to being told that we're broken. And, I couldn't even get my baby in the right position, right? With breech, You're only accepted if it's head down. So it's, it's two things. It's one, how society treats women. So we're very happy to say that we're broken. And then also how the illness paradigm, or how medicine and nursing has allowed women to believe that we're broken as well. The way we stop it, or the way we change it, is to just put it right back to what we've always had, which is relationship-based care with a midwife, and having that continuity of care. And it seems like we're asking for a jet to go to the moon because it would seem to be so difficult, but it's not. We're not asking for brain surgery or rocket science. We're just saying, you know what, women really want a midwife, and midwives want to work with women. And midwives are highly trained professionals that go through university degrees, that have thousands of hours of clinical placement, even just through their degree. They follow women through their degree. They're taught by expert midwives. They know how to care for women. So trust the midwives and trust the women. But our patriarchal system does not categorically know how to trust women, and midwives, 99.9% of them are women. So how can we trust a profession that's also made up of women?
That was so good.
It's so good. So accurate.
Yeah.
Well, I think I may have put my feminist hat on.
That's okay. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I'm thinking, because gosh, couldn't we all have a Hazel sitting on our shoulder, like as we're going into the next pregnancy, especially if you're going in for a VBAC. But I'm just thinking in my mind, because you've obviously, with your experience in the hospital, nurse, then midwife, 20 years, you would have heard so many different situations, and the way that women were talked to about VBACs, and why it's not a good idea to have one. I'm wondering if you could maybe give some examples, and maybe some of the myths that women are fed, and some obviously the counter argument for that as well, so that they can kind of have something in their toolbox to come back with if they're in that situation.
Well, coming back to you having the Hazel on the shoulder, well, I've had women who said that they've taken the book in, they're fully equipped with a little mini Hazel in the book. So that can certainly help. I actually ended up writing a whole chapter called "Can I Have a VBAC If ... because I would get endless messages from women on social media and midwives asking me, I've got this, or I've got that, or can I have a VBAC, and blah, blah, blah. So I ended up, it wasn't going to be its own chapter, but when I was writing, and writing is an organic process. So, you might think what you're going to do, but then when you write it, it can change. So I ended up with this entire chapter. And, I looked at a variety of different things So I looked at, can I go post-dates? Because often we're told that, women planning an induction can't go overdue. And my question is, well, why not? Like, are they just going to explode? Like, what's happening here? Like, what are we doing? There's no other reason why, if you've had a previous cesarean, that you can't go overdue. You've got the same risks as everyone else, and that being a very, very small risk of increased stillbirth the longer that you go, and that's not based on placentas failing. Sometimes we just don't know why that happens, but purely because the longer that you are, the more likely that is going to happen. But there shouldn't be a cut-off date for VBAC. Your uterine, your scar doesn't go, oh, it's been long enough now, time to rupture. It has no idea. There's your uterus is just a body part, does not have feelings, so does not have thoughts or a mind of its own, and yeah, so that's no reason to not go over. The other thing is, people will say, can I be induced and if I'm planning a VBAC? And so often advice might be, you can't be induced because it increases your uterine rupture rate. Well, nothing increases your uterine rupture rate to 100% uterine rupture rate, except for the point that you're being cut open and they open up across your scar and you're having a cesarean.
Wow.
Right? Wow. That's about the only thing that's going to happen. Nothing can do that. So even with induction, we would see rates going up into the 2%, but if you add lots of induction agents. So we don't really use prostin as much anymore, but if you use prostin, which is like the gel, to start off labour, and then you had the Syntocin on, or in America they call that Pitocin, but we call it Synto in Australia, then having the Synto added, then that had slightly higher uterine rupture rates than if it was just prostin alone or Synto alone. And I think that is just the amount of stress that's being put and chemical changes going on in the uterus over that longer period, because obviously if you're having prostin and Synto, you've probably been in labour longer than if you just had one or the other and didn't need the next step, So I think that's more of a time thing and the stressor of it. So now they know just to not combine the two of them. And that might be instead using mechanical opening, like having the balloon inserted, or a different type of starting induction agent, and then going to Synto. But as a great obstetrician that came to one of my workshops said, when I asked him, what advice do you give for women who, are talking about induction and VBAC, he said, well, the care's not going to change. Like, they're still in a hospital and they're still being monitored and they're still being closely monitored and supported. And we still have a hospital, we still have a theatre just down the corridor. So it doesn't matter what you pump into the woman, really, tongue in cheek, doesn't matter what you pump in there, you're still going to care for the woman in the same way, and you're still going to go to theatres if you see these signs. So, I quite liked his attitude on that, because not saying that induction is a great thing, and certainly in the birth experience studies, we're seeing a very different light on induction. However, it shouldn't be taken away as a choice for women if women want to make that choice.
Yeah.
There are things like, twins, breaches, lots of other little bits and pieces that really there's no evidence to say that you can't, but there might be limited evidence to support it as well.
What about, because I've had VBAC, I've obviously been able to talk to a lot of other women that have as well, or have had a cesarean, and the ones that didn't end up having VBACs is because when they spoke to their care provider, they said, look, you're most likely going to end up in a cesarean if you go for a VBAC. So, you may as well do an elective one. And
so they also described that they went into the room and there was just like this crystal ball on the table.
Exactly.
And they had some candles going, and then they also did a palm reading and some cards as well. It's like, because how on
how
earth
would you know?
can they see into the future
in
that kind of way?
Of
course, there can be things that can maybe increase your probability of maybe not having a VBAC, or maybe more likely to have a cesarean. But you can just never say never when it comes to labour and birth and women, because we are amazing, and you can never tell what's going to happen until it happens. And I know I got a little bit tested or not tested, but challenged as a midwife. And I loved this challenge because it had such an amazing outcome, where we might often say, let's look at a few different things on whether or not a woman's more likely to have a VBAC, or, which again it's just literally dabbling in fortune telling, to be honest, I think. So we might say a woman who's had a repeat reason for cesareans. So if the baby's been stuck and then stuck and then stuck and then stuck, that means that she can't birth her baby. Well, does it? Or does it mean that baby was just in a pretty tricky position each time? Or does that mean that she was on the bed the whole time and couldn't be supported to be mobilized? Or, there could be so many other reasons. Maybe her care providers didn't let her get up. There could be a whole lot of other different reasons for that. We might say that her height, or we can come up with so many different reasons on why maybe you can't. And I cared for an amazing woman who had planned her first VBAC with me and had a repeat cesarean during labour for a variety of different reasons. And then with her next birth, wanted to plan another cesarean with me. And in my head, I'm like thinking of all of these things, right, that are probably going to decrease her chances to do it. But so what? Yeah. The woman wanted the opportunity to do it. I offered her the support to do that. And throughout the whole labour, and this was a VBAC up to 2 cesareans at home, I just felt like, I'm a very visual person, and I felt like the Lady Justice with my scales. And so if I was needing to think and to go, okay, what's going on here, I would just think of those scales. And then one scale was, is the mum okay? Is the woman okay? Is the baby okay? And using the skills that I have, obviously I don't have x-ray vision, but using the skills and the resources that I had in the home, could I tell that the mum was okay, and could I tell that was the baby okay? And most of the time it was the mum's faltering a bit psychologically and needs a bit of a boost. And so it would be looking at that and getting her up and being mobile. And we did absolutely everything except the swing from the chandeliers. And I only think it was because there were no chandeliers in the house. So we did everything. We did the going up and down the stairs, and everything she did, I did with her. Well, pretty much, not everything. But we walked around the garden. We would have laps every hour. We just ticked every single box there could be. And in my head, was I thinking, I'm not sure if this is going to happen? At times, absolutely. Did I ever let her think that? No, because that's not my job.
Yeah.
My job is to 100% support that woman as a midwife. So, and to give information. And I kept balancing those scales, and there was never a time where I had to turn around and go, I need to give you some different information here. So she didn't even believe it either, even when the head came out, that she was going to have a vaginal birth, but she did. And it made me just think, I went home and I wrote an entire reflection based on Lady Justice, like even before I went to sleep. I remember ringing one of my colleagues here, who was one of my supervisors at the time, and going, blah, 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 and she's like, write that down. I'm like, okay, I will. And so I wrote this big reflection about it, and it's actually going to go, well, it's about 80% going to go in my next book, because I'm just, I don't know, I won't say 100% going in there, because what if I just suddenly feel nervous at the end and don't put it in? But I shouldn't. I aim to put it in my next book that I'm currently writing, to show that, what do we do to support women? And we shouldn't use that kind of fortune telling, because you can just never know. Yeah. She had the odds stacked against her. If we just looked at it on paper, people would have said, you shouldn't go for this. But she wanted to have that opportunity, and she wanted to have that chance, and she had someone who could support her to do that. And that's what we shouldn't be taken away.
Yeah. And also, any labour is good labour, really, right? Because I remember Dr. Sarah Buckley saying, any kind of, even if you end up in a cesarean, if you can labour for a few hours or 10 hours even, that starts to get the body prepared for breastfeeding and for bonding, and you're allowing all those hormones to start to flow. So even if you've had a cesarean and you think, even if there's just a small chance that you think, yes, I might be able to have a vaginal birth, if you can just prepare yourself mentally, if you need to have a cesarean, that's okay. But what if you could do at least 10 hours of labor, and then you end up as a cesarean? That's okay, because then your body is starting to prepare for that baby. And
And the reasons why women will have a in labour or out of labour repeat cesarean really comes down to the other reasons why you would have to have one in any other pregnancy as well. You know, there are some conditions that we know can happen, or some things that can happen that really need to have that, you know, and you know, we don't need to list them off now, but we know that they are there. There are some really good reasons, and I'm so grateful that we have a healthcare system that means we can transfer in if we needed, or women can go from planning a VBAC to having a cesarean safely, and the outcomes are good because we have a great system for that. So, you know, I wouldn't want people to think that I'm advocating never to have cesareans, because my goodness, you know, we need them. And I'm so grateful that we've got a system that we can access that when needed. But just purely from having a previous cesarean and using that as an excuse to coerce women into having a repeat cesarean because it's that healthcare provider's comfort more than the woman's comfort, and that's not okay.
Yeah 100%. It's that informed decision making.
It's so important.
I read in your research that there was, you know, you sort of ended up realizing that there was 4 key factors that help women achieve that, you know, positive and empowered birthing experience. I wonder if you could touch on those for us.
So one part of I did a mixed method study for my PhD, and that means you balance the qualitative with the quantitative. So the qualitative is all those feelings and experiences and personal lived experience, to the numbers and the stats, which is the quantitative. So in my qualitative phase, I followed women through the entire pregnancy, and they had an app that I designed for them to record their feelings and their experiences, and then I interviewed them all afterwards. So I ended up with a lot of rich data. I had about 13 women that I'm so grateful who volunteered their whole pregnancies and births to research, and shared all their stories with me, which was fantastic. And when I was looking at analysing that, I used a method called narrative analysis, which is I kept their stories as a whole, so all of their recordings and then their interview was one whole story. And so some women left 10 plus recordings plus their hour plus interview. So I had really in-depth stories. And then I compared and contrasted them to see what were the similarities and what were the differences and what were the threads that went through all of them to really come up with a analysis. And then in my survey, I tested those factors. So the 4 factors that came out were women could either experience them very positively or experience them very negatively. And they were having control, having confidence, having a relationship, and having active labour. So having control, we know that's important because when we look at the research around birth trauma, a loss of control is often the biggest factor that women talk about. So then having control is a bit of a protective factor for birth trauma. But sometimes people get caught up in control, like, well, you can't control the birth and you can't control this. But it's actually, how I describe it, or how it came from this evidence, was how in control women felt of their wishes, their choices, and their birth experiences. So it was the whole picture. Did they feel that they were involved? Did they have informed decision making, or was that taken away from them? So that control is really important. So if you had a good experience of feeling in control, then that you're more likely to have a positive birth experience compared to feeling negative about that. The next one was having confidence. And Eleanor, you touched on it, I touched on it. It's very hard to have confidence in your body when you've not pushed a baby out of your vagina before. And you've got the whole world stacked up against you for not doing it. So it's not just about the confidence in the body, because as women, it's really hard for us to do that. But it was actually how confident the woman felt they were in their healthcare provider. So if you had a healthcare provider that was saying, oh, I don't think you can do this, and why would you bother? It's just only one day. Why don't you just book in for cesarean? Then we know when it is. Or, you know, I don't think you're growing well. Or all that kind of doubting, that constant drip feed of doubt meant that you probably wouldn't have a lot of confidence, feel that they've got confidence in your ability. But if you had someone that said, I really believe in you, you've got this, I'm going to be here the whole time, you know, we're going to look at all these different alternatives that might happen, but ultimately, like, I believe that you can do this and I'm here behind you, then that gave the woman the confidence to feel like, well, they believe in me. So if they believe in me, and you mentioned that with the midwife, you know, the midwife believed in you and was happy to take that take on that very small risk. So that then made you have faith in being able to do it. So that confidence was really impacted by how confident that care provider was. And then there was having a relationship. So that was looking at a continuity relationship, but one that was based, because not all continuity is the same, one that was based on trust and equity and fairness. So the woman and the healthcare provider were actually being at the same level, and that there was trust and there was a relationship between them, nothing like weirdo relationship stuff, but a good professional relationship that was based on trust and support and equity. If women had that, they felt much better about their birth experience than if they didn't have that, or they felt betrayed at the end, or if there was a breakdown of the relationship, or they didn't have continuity in the first place. And then that final one is active labour, because for the women that I spoke to and also then surveyed, so many of them got knowledgeable next time round. They figured out what they were going to do the next time round to be active in labour. And we know that being upright and active in labour is more likely to result in a vaginal birth. So being active in labour is actually really important for women planning a VBAC. And if they were really, really active in labour and ticked all their boxes, and remind me of that story I just told you, we did all this stuff. We ticked every single box we could to be active in labour. And then at the very end had a repeat cesarean or a repeat in labour cesarean, they felt much less disappointed because they tried everything and ticked every box than those that were not being encouraged or supported or allowed to be active in labour. And then if they had a repeat in labour cesarean, felt that they were cheated, or maybe, if only I'd got off the bed, or if only I had done this, and they felt more disappointed. So it's accumulation of those 4 factors, being positive or negative on those factors, resulted in how you felt about your birth experience. So you could either feel really amazing and happy, or resolved. So for some women who had a repeat cesarean, they felt high on those 4 factors. They actually felt a sense of resolution, because they did absolutely everything, and then there was a resolution to potentially what had happened before. Or they may feel really negative, and this is where it's not always about the vagina, because what if a woman had a really terrible vaginal birth experience? What if she experienced obstetric violence? What if she had some really awful experiences? If we only ever say it's about the VBAC, then that silences women who then have a really bad experience with that and wish they'd had a repeat cesarean. So rather than focusing on it's got to be this or that, it's actually got to be about how women feel in that whole experience and basing it off those 4 factors.
Yeah, totally. Well said.
Oh, yes,
so
Hazel.
we could talk to Hazel forever, couldn't we?
I know.
It's so good. But we'll have to wrap it here. And oh my gosh, we could definitely have her on again and again and again and again. But I wanted to definitely just reiterate that book by Hazel, especially if you've had a cesarean, you want to arm yourself with a little Hazel on your shoulder. That one was Birth After Cesarean, Your Journey to a Better Birth. And I think you can get it. Can you get it through your website, Hazel, or is it just
you can get it? There's a few online stores in Australia that have it. So
we'll put the links.
Store, they stock it. Little Lost Bookshop in Katoomba, they stock it. And there's a few other places. And you can also get it on Amazon. Okay,
we'll definitely put a link in there too. And follow Hazel on Instagram. I had a good stalk. You are amazing. All your stuff is so positive. Just like uplifting. It's amazing. So at Hazel Keedle as well. And is there anywhere else that people are going to see? You've got any anywhere that you're speaking next or anything like that coming up?
I'm at the Rebellious Midwives Conference next week. So that's going to be fun. And I'm a keynote at the Australian College of Midwives National Conference next month. And I've got to get onto those presentations.
Woohoo! How exciting!
Through you though,
and hopefully next year, I'm also writing a second book for midwives and doctors to look at how they can best support women who are planning a VBAC. So to try and give them some really good advice and base that on evidence, and that's jam-packed full of stories from midwives and doctors as well.
Oh, amazing! Exactly what we need.
Going to keep a lookout for that.
Well, amazing work, Hazel.
Thank you so much for your time today, for your dedication to helping women, especially in the VBAC community. For people like you, as soon as you have a VBAC, you know how important this work is. And we just want to say a big thank you.
Yeah.
And we look forward to speaking to you again, probably when your next book comes out, because we want to hear all about that too.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me on today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Hazel.
See you soon.